All right, so if you want to wrap up your little bit of conversation, we're going to dive into, we'll cover very briefly systems and protections and then talk about incidence response. You all seem so far away now. So this is our iKeepSafe FERPA and our COPPA safe harbor. So we did apply from the FTC that we are a safe harbor, which provides companies a little bit of cover with their COPPA. And then the California Student Privacy Badge has been designed and it's worked out. So if you have companies that you're talking to and you'd like to have their products reviewed for California data privacy, we've worked with F3, which is the law firm that created this guide for student privacy here in California. And then we've put together a questionnaire that the vendors fill out that asks the questions that you will be asking about contracts, about third parties, describe how you're going to secure the data. So all those open-ended questions, we'll gather that up. And when we do the assessment, we'll do the manual and the technical, and then the product profile you'll have. So all the schools will have it. So industry does it, they pay for it once, all the schools have access to it. But then they can be reviewed randomly on our own up to 4 times, but if there's a big major change, they have to notify us and notify you, and then we can do another assessment. So it gives us a way to have some checks and balances. And for them, it's done under NDA. So they don't have to worry that we're not trying to put a bullseye on anybody. We just want everybody to measure up and then to be very transparent and be able to communicate trusted back. So what we didn't talk about was the importance of, we talked about an incident response plan. So we talked about an e-safety committee, and that's where we bring together our multiple stakeholders who are the curriculum people, the media literacy folks, the technology directors, the principals who have to discipline. If you have a law enforcement liaison, that's really incredibly helpful. It's also where you have public health. So in many school settings, if it hasn't happened already, there's things that come up in the digital space that kids will talk about or they'll share that fall within that health and well-being. So it just happened in my high school. My daughter sent me a text, Mom, the friend I know, she's talking about suicide, looks like she's got a plan, now what do we do? So really quickly there's intervention. And the little freshman, she had 2 Instagram accounts and her family knew about one, but there was the other one that some of the kids knew about school where she had articulated her plan and how it was going to happen. And so there was intervention that was early. Well, the technology director and the math teacher aren't necessarily the first people to be very helpful in that situation. So when you have in your e-safety committee, you have your school nurse, you have your counselor, you already know each other, and then you also have a plan in place. So the incident response plan is what happens prepared or unprepared. So if you don't have an incident response plan, some of the other schools we've seen where they've done a one-to-one program, a teacher will just make an quick remark or response to a parent that maybe is upset, and maybe the teacher's just doing best guess, but maybe it doesn't actually reflect the careful work that's been done by people. And then what becomes just an inconvenience then is a PR nightmare. And the PR nightmare means a parent calls the news then reports, and then there's a whole series of things that happen because of this very first response. So as our teachers, frontline teachers, and everyone who has access to students understands the things that we're going to say. So in our school district, these are the top things we are already doing around safety and privacy online. This is what we're already doing to protect privacy. So everybody should have this sense of, I know what to do when something goes wrong. So it doesn't mean they have to know past that point of passing it off to the principal. So when in Virginia, I've lived in Arlington for 10 years, and one of the vice principals in Loudoun County, they were arrested for child pornography, and I was just so mortified. I think I was telling some people, oh, target-rich environment, those poor students, and I had all these horrible things to think about somebody who was a child pornographer, predator in a school setting. But then when the next news came out, I went, oh no, it's probably a great vice principal caring about his students, trying to problem solve. And so what had happened is he had an incident that he had the image sent to his phone because he knew how to get the phone to the server for his email. And then from his email, he sent those pictures to other people for help. He was being totally transparent. Nothing sneaky, nothing malicious. He for sure was not a sexual predator, but he was arrested for possession and distribution of child pornography. And that's when we went, okay, this is not all right. I've got 6 children. I want to make sure they all have great educators. And if people can't feel safe in their own careers, we're not going to get great people to stay in education and to come into education. So we worked with a series of defense attorneys who are currently in courts defending schools around issues. Then we worked with prosecutors and investigators who are currently working, and we gave them a long series of scenarios of things that we know are already happening because of the courts. So we just gathered up, we didn't have to say what school or what student, but we had a series of incidents that are going to show up. Like every day you've got something new that you never thought you'd have to deal with because you're in technology, but now it's all these other strange human behavior things that are totally unexpected. So we walked them through this series of scenarios and said, okay, if you had this image, or you had this scenario, or you had this drama, what would you want for the schools to know? And the defense attorneys always say this, oh, well, the schools are their worst enemy because they destroy all the evidence they need for everything good to happen. Because the principals are always anxious to find out, so what really happened, and in the process, they start to damage all the evidence and can never be used. So all the good information that should be available to be able to have positive outcomes is no longer available because it can't go to court and can't be used to defend the schools or the students. So our goal was to make sure that we had fewer negative outcomes for everybody involved, the bystander, the schools, and the victims. So by asking the prosecutors, investigators, and then we had the public health worker, we had the technology director, and we went through these series of scenarios and created a way for you to triage incident response. So this is when you want your teachers to know, you know what? So you've got that bad image on your phone, or so this happened. I was in a school, and a teacher had picked up the phone that was not supposed to be out in a middle school class, and the 12-year-old, his screensaver, he had 2 handguns like this, and he had gang paraphernalia. Now, the teacher's going, what do I do with this? Am I legally obligated? I don't want to be involved in the gang stuff. This is already a dangerous area. What ethically should I do? There was not a response plan at that school yet. So she fortunately did report it. The law enforcement got involved. They found the stash of weapons so close to the school. But the best outcome is that this 12-year-old now is in a program to help him extricate himself from gangs versus waiting till he's 16 and committed a crime. So there is a great opportunity for people who are prepared and ready to respond, but you want your teachers, your frontline people that have access to kids with their technology to have a set of all ready to go, okay, weird image or weird interaction, or they hacked into the server and changed grades, or they've impersonated a teacher and they've sent out, it can go on, the different types of things that happen, but there's a series of protocols about gathering evidence that's very consistent. So we created it first as an online tool, and it's interactive, and in your books it is page, somebody tell me where that incident response tool is.
Table of contents.
Table of contents, and it's called, did somebody tell me 104? Oh good, thank you. Generation Safe. So we built it first behind a firewall that you can't get to, but then Samsung just gave us a grant to make it to apps that are open. So the Android app is available and ready to go, and if you go to iKeepSafe Incident Response, you'll find it on the Google Play. The Apple is totally ready. We just have to stop doing whatever we're doing and get it launched on the Apple Store. But it's totally all designed. So it should be incredibly quick. But what the incident response does is it's going to walk you through an incident and all of the thinking, the best thinking anyway, about how you're going to manage it. How you gather and store the evidence, how you interview the bystander, the victims, and the perpetrator. So what are some of the best thinking about how you gather this information? And then it follows in 2 tiers. So when you're going down through here, when you've got your school administrator, you're notified of an incident, then you're going to think, okay, how do I store the evidence? How do I preserve it? And do I need to bring in IC, our internet technology folks? Do I need to bring in law enforcement? That comes in here where you're asking these questions. And then where you see the red, this is when you want to bring in your legal folks. Sometimes it's law enforcement, sometimes it's the civil, your attorney, your defense attorneys, because it's a potential PR nightmare. So PR nightmares are so much better to be be proactive about. And I think one of the best things I heard from the attorney who works so much defending schools, he said, when you look historically at the big issues that have happened with schools in civil cases, if principals or decision makers recognize the role of customer service. So when you have an upset parent and an upset student, and something particularly happens in the digital space, you want them to know that you care about them, you're listening. He says in your backpack, in your series of suggestions and recommendations, you want to know what in the community is available to help. So whether it's dating violence, eating disorders, drug addictions, in the digital space, this all shows up, and it's public. And then you find out about it, people find out about it, and when you have an upset parent, you want to be sure you can point them to services. When you see lawsuits where schools have not done well, it's when you've got a school district or a geographic region and similar incidents happen, but one principal disciplines one way and another one there's a suspension. And then the people say, oh, my mom says, well, that's not fair, it's not fair, it's not right, and then it escalates and escalates. So when you look overall, and we had our map about the desert, you plug people in, there's cybercrime abuse. You plug students in, you're going to bump into stuff. They're already plugged in, and what happens that's rough at your school is also going to go up. So then the next level is what are those policies? And this is where your e-safety committee, you're going to make these decisions in advance. How are you going to manage these incidents? So looking at the curriculum, how are we going to implement something like a Fitbit or some of the scenarios? How are we going to do that? And that's where in policies, you create in your terms of service or your acceptable use or your responsible use policy, this is where you have the language for that. And then the next step after policies enforcement is education. So when you see a school who's gathered an e-safety committee and they've worked on this, what do we really expect from each other? What do we expect from student to student, from teacher to student, and from teacher to teacher, and from school to district? What are our expectations? How are we going to enforce it? And then when something goes wrong, that's what policies are. And then the programs that support them are the ones that make the behaviors happen. So that's where education fits in. So this is when you've got a school that's figured it out, when the curriculum starts to align with their actual acceptable use policy. Because what they're expecting is clear enough that the teachers understand it and they're teaching it, and it's reinforced over and over. So even if you have an acceptable use policy that says, well, we already decided we're going to handle it like this, if it's not been referred to, so we learned this from the defense attorneys, if it's not been referenced, if it's only that one event that happens that one time, you sign it and it goes in the file, it's not the same, it doesn't carry the same legal protection. You have to refer to it. It has to be a living document. Remember in our acceptable use policy, we talked about how we're going to talk about teachers in this classroom. Remember in the acceptable use policy, we talked about how we're going to handle cell phones in this class. And remember, so as you become more and more ubiquitous, the expectations with the programs, that alleviates so many problems. And then it alleviates the tech director who on their own is trying to deal with a law enforcement crisis over some random things that, we did not go to school for this. It wasn't, tech directors were not, taught all about the law enforcement components. But the communication plan, when you use the app or the incident response tool, it's going to walk you through modules so you're asking the right questions and documenting. One thing that I wanted to make sure you knew is that if you ever were in a case that you had to defend yourself, and I saw this in a really great private school in the DC area, they actually had done a lot in their school around bullying prevention, and cyberbullying prevention, but the principal hadn't really documented it, and then they just lived in an area where one of the New York Times reporters had a student at the school. And so, you know, ask a little this, ask a little bit of that, then it's a New York Times article, and that principal was actually released. Not because they hadn't done their job or done things, but there wasn't a plan that they could document and show. So one of the most helpful things is for when you have your acceptable use policy, is you also have your communication plan about incidents, how you're going to manage it, and then you document it, that process. So you start, if you don't have an e-safety team right now, then you start this month. By January, you'll be organized and ready, and you put the date down, and this is what we talked about. Privacy. This is where we talked about where it fits into PE class. This is where we talked about curriculum. This is where we looked and identified our gaps in these knowledge pieces, or this is where we talked about the equity issues. And as you document that, it helps you with your own journey, but it also is incredibly helpful if you ever get somebody that's suing you. So it's very, very helpful. Are there some questions that you want to run through? Some? So you had that look like you wanted to ask.
No, I'm in my brain right now. I'm thinking about how I get the information that you're presenting today to the larger audience of folks within the system that need to hear it. I'm thinking about the principals, the directors, and then eventually, and it shouldn't be eventually, but ultimately it needs to get down to the teacher level too. But there's a lot of information. There's a lot to assimilate. I will tell you, I spoke with an incredibly brilliant, talented, bright educator who is also very tech savvy, who said, wow, I'm overwhelmed, I'm struggling with this. No, but what that means is if you got folks who already are coming in with skill set and understanding, capacity and context, having a hard time getting their head wrapped around how do you even approach this, what does that mean for the folks that don't even crack a computer in their class that often, right? So in my head, that's what I'm thinking through is how do I scale this understanding and then get a systemic approach to rolling this out. The great news is I got some of the right people around the table today in our system. From my perspective, I know that we got others from other districts here to kind of help support this from their business area, but there's a lot to it. It's great information, needs to happen, but it really needs to become a systemic cultural thing. You talked a lot about, this being something that's it's every day, it's part of the conversation. And that's work that hasn't really been done yet for a whole variety of reasons, I think, good reasons, but I think the time is now to really start addressing that, certainly within our particular system right now. So
it's about human behavior, and how do we help people who have not had to work before learn to communicate and work together as a team. So it's really about a system of change in leadership. So public health shows us that what changes behavior is not the horror story. It's not the burnt lung that changed people from smoking, right? It's actually when they know someone and they trust them and they get an encouraging comment. So it has to be positive and optimistic, and we social norm. So if where you are, wherever with your districts or your counties, if you bring together a committee, an e-safety committee at a big level, and you walk through the process and you assess, where am I with my policies? So you start with policy, because as soon as you plug, you've got, you're already there. So what's my policy around social media? What's my policy around seizures of phone? What's my policy for handling equity access issues? What's my policy? And you just go through the checklist of all the things that we know. I mean, I have a checklist of that. So I'm happy to share. And then you look at what are the programs that help us support these policies that now we understand. So it's not just out there so let's say, okay, what's the policy if you see a cell phone image that you think may be illegal or could threaten someone's life? Do you know right now? Do you have one? So that would be what you start with, the things that you don't have that you know for sure sometime are going to happen. And then you say, okay, this is how we're the adults, we're creating a network of support, this is how we're going to handle a potentially life-threatening or an illegal image on a cell phone. And now we say, okay, Mr. Principal or Miss Principal, here's your Faraday bag. You're going to take that phone, you're going to stick it in, you're going to zip it up, and you're not going to look at anything until you call your attorney, if it could be potentially like that. So there are some times that you just zip it up, and if it's in a Faraday bag, you can't iCloud that. Then whatever's on there, and then you don't just put it on the shelf, you lock it up. So part of that preserving evidence means that you know exactly where it's been and who's had access to it the whole time that you've had it. And this is when you call your legal folks, and then that's when you start bringing in parents after you've figured out these little components. But that's like you've got a policy then you have a plan in place, and now you put together the communication in advance because you know it's going to happen. So the communication is, you know, we have an acceptable use policy in our school, and it includes if there's an illegal image on the phone. And this is how we handle it. And all the parents know in advance. It gets zipped up in a Faraday bag, it gets locked up, and we have a series of questions that we talk to about the students and the parents and law enforcement if it's potentially an illegal image. Then everybody in the room doesn't have to worry, what if I'm the teacher that finds that image? Or if I'm the tech director who's trying to deal with it all alone and going, oh no, now who do I bring in? Same thing with suicide. You're going to, for sure, have students that you're aware of that are at safety risk. They have a low mental health score and they are at a high risk for suicide. Do you have a policy in place with your teachers? So that you walk through the places where you really want people to feel comfortable, and you build the policies around it, and then the education programs to support it. Then you build the technical infrastructure to help you detect and intervene and respond and prevent. And at the end, you have your incident response. So everybody has this continuity of, we have our policies, we all understand them, they're plain language, the parents know them, the students, the teachers, we refer to them. We have curriculum that point to the skills we expect them to live. So you can go through, we have the 3 matrices in there already, but there's, you look, if you want kids to respect other people's property, then you have to teach them how to do it in the digital space. You want them to be kind to each other, you have to, you know, you build it in. Then you have your policies are supported by the education programs. You already have people at the school who know how to do this. If they know what you need them to do, the curriculum people know how to get it out. But when you have technology directors trying to, in a silo, figure it out, and you have curriculum directors who do not know the needs that the technology director understands. So remember when we did our city, the first person to know there was cybercrime, exploitation, and radicalization, who was it? Right before the policy leaders. How did the policy leaders find out? Industry, right. And who represents industry in your ecosystem here? The tech director, because they see it, right? They get the files in and out. Hopefully our tech directors are seeing it and detecting. So it's the tech directors have their own set of needs. The policy leaders have their own set. But if we don't talk to each other and understand, then we don't have the nurses helping to know how to handle the student who's perhaps suicidal, or the anorexic who other friends know she's anorexic because of what she's posting. Like, this is all happening to us in every school all over the world. And it's literally that pattern of policies, the programs that support it, the systems, the technology and human systems, and then the incident response. And that's it. You do those 4 on all the problematic areas, then you have a plan in place. And that's what teachers hear. That's what teachers know. And then when you have an upset parent, you say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry. You know, we knew that sometime that might happen. So we put this plan in place. And this is how we're protecting, and this is how we're supporting you to have a healthy, thriving child in this new environment. And it works. It lowers the anxiety level of everyone. We feel the most fearful and anxious when we're doing it alone and we're in our little silo. So the more you get that team, you know, another idea too for spreading it out, in Simi Valley, they took all the principals in a room and no one else was allowed in, and they ran through an incident response series of scenarios. And before they pulled the principals in, and it was, you know, the regular PD, there's a time you get principals together regularly, I'm sure your county does it. So it was one of those moments. And so Dana Greenspan, she had sent out a series of scenarios and said, okay, how would you handle this? And then she just put the results up. She didn't give anybody's name. And they were so different. And they're all in the same district. They're all next to each other. And it was the same scenario from a different perspective and different principles, and wow, it was like across the board. So then she had their attention, And the principals, as soon as they realize nobody in my school is here, they just spill the beans. Like, oh man, and I'm dealing with this one, and we got this one, and then we got this teacher with that one, and oh my. And they were able to walk through, what are you really dealing with, instead of what do I have to pretend I'm not dealing with. And a lot of really great work got done. And then those principals went back and they pulled their e-safety committees together. And within 6 months or so, it takes a while to sort through so the policies are not so, no offense, attorneys, just legal. But actually, this is what this means about human interaction and behavior. And then once they got that work done, then their curriculum teams built the curriculum to support it. And 5 years later, it's amazing what they've been able to do. And they've been able to do quite a bit with, they had a lot of students who were having issues with heroin. And so they had the community group work together, and they brought some specialists in, and they were able to detect and intervene in a new way that was really very helpful. Kids live their life out online. Emotionally, they connect with those devices. And it's different. For us, it's a tool. For them, it's their emotional lifeline. So everything plays out, and it's playing out in front of you, and you have to respond. So the 4, again, policies, programs, systems, response. Policies, programs, systems, response. So in your packet, just as a wrap-up, you have just stuff you're welcome to. There's 3 matrices, one on healthy balance, one on healthy relationships, and one on privacy that takes you through K through 12. The concepts. It's the Berkman curriculum. It's our toolkit of ideas for teaching. So we just gathered up. We've got this little toolkit the teacher can put on, and it's all about the tools that we use to help us with our Be a Pro concepts. So that's where we get this one, the little markers. Because everything online is a little bit like writing with a Sharpie. And our over here for when you're protecting your personal information and you're securing it with your lock. But over here, when you have relationships, we want to be lifelines and helpful. And our carabiners help us do that. So just, anyway, there are ideas of ways to help bridge the communication about digital concepts. Alan?
I want to emphasize one point that I think threads back through. She was talking about, in the case of a bad incident and a potential lawsuit, it's really important to have shown your work. All the math teachers and others will appreciate that. To have actually be able to demonstrate, like, no, here's what we were doing. Here's what we did to prevent this and to prepare for it. In the same way, in the privacy space writ large, that's another big part of what you want to be able to communicate to your parents and to others and to your whole school community. Like, here's what our policies are, and here, especially in building that e-safety team, here are the steps we've taken. So when you build that team and bring that team together and get buy-in from everybody, make sure that's recorded too. It's an important part of the story you're telling that you'll then want to get out to parents and others about the proactive steps you're taking. I said this at the beginning, we always want to stress this, we are not here at all to discourage the ed tech innovations that you're adopting. We're here to help you defend them. Because sooner or later, you may have concerns, you may have a potential problem, and the more you've got background showing what you did, the infrastructure you built, to take your best approach at this. We've had a lot of conversations with some of the lawyers that really best practices are going to rule the day in privacy. Nobody's going to be able to say, we've got the perfect fix. We've figured out exactly how to manage everything. But the more you can show that you're doing a great job and showing your work around the companies and products you adopt, the policies you put in place, and the communications you send out to parents, the much better footing you're on.
Just to clarify, you said the schools that you're working with, you have e-safety committees. You have a district level e-safety committee, and then there's site level e-safety committees. Is that accurate?
So it started at the county. So it was Ventura County. So it was with Dana and Steve. And so we worked with a couple of the districts, and we pulled together the e-safety committee, and we helped them self-assess. Where are they in this process, and where are they with the stakeholders? And then over the course of time, you just watch what happens when you The unexpected outcome is that you get champions that you never expected in some random topic that you didn't even know, like the history teacher becomes the champion of some component that you never expected. But you get them at the table, and that's where the real work happens. And they come together regularly, and they count for where they are and where they're going next. It's really powerful.
I'm just curious, are there any school districts or schools represented here today that have something like that in place at a formal level?
It's not explicit. We have our student services has a response mode. They kick into a certain kind of gear and certain people come together, but it's not part of the district culture.
Right, that proactive, so the e-safety committee creates a proactive conversation about developing the plans and the policies and the processes and the communication for parents and so forth. So that was one of the outcomes for me of the conversation here, was thinking we really need to be thinking of the time is right to really be thinking about having something a little more formalized and consistent and ongoing in place to start having these conversations, because they're meaty and they're not simple, and it requires conversation, discussion, and reflection.
It's environmental. So the digital space is a new environment. So if we were to take everything we did today onto the moon, we would ask a lot of questions, and those are the questions your e-safety committees need to be thinking about. It is different than when I went to school. Many of it's the same, but the types of things you have to prepare for and how you manage it is actually different, just because of how you gather the evidence and how you respond. So there are some differences.